Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Thomas, for letting me be part of this and for joining you all for another session. I was grateful to be with you this morning. And just to be part of this gathering is a real honor. I know I am in the midst of so many people who care deeply about helping young people with disabilities thrive in all areas of their life. And I know many of you are trying to forge really new pathways to post-secondary education that I think can not only hold a lot of potential to transform the lives of people, young people with disabilities, but actually also these campuses and their communities. So I'm going to talk about inclusive higher education and a future of flourishing, because I see this as a way of summarizing, I think, many of the efforts that we're making collectively right now to create a future of flourishing for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but also I think a future of flourishing for our college campuses and learning communities. And I think the reciprocity of this conversation has to be front and center. I'll come back to that later. Otherwise, campuses never move in this direction. If it's good for you, maybe we'll get to it. If it's good for us, we start to see much more movement. And I'll unpack what I mean by that as well. So I know for some of you, this might be a brand new conversation. Others of you have been at this probably longer than I have. So I hope this is going to be a learning opportunity for all of us. I am presently at Baylor University in Waco, Texas. I moved here about 2 years ago. Prior to that, I spent 12 years at Vanderbilt University, and for much of that time was the faculty lead for the Vanderbilt Next Steps program, which is an inclusive college program for students with intellectual disability. And I'm really going to draw heavily on what I learned there through the experience of an incredible team that's continuing on to do even better work. And as I look ahead to thinking about what this might look like on my own campus, perhaps here at Baylor University. So I'm going to pull a lot of photos and examples from my time in Tennessee as well as we go. So you'll see a lot of Vanderbilt logos in the mix, which is odd for a guy at Baylor now, you know. But let me start by just sharing, I think, again, a little bit of the history to me as I think about just how marvelous and impressive it is that we are having conversations about college pathways for students with intellectual disability. I mentioned earlier I turned 52 this year. I turned 52 this year, I guess. And if I just think about my own kind of age as anchoring a timeline for our progress in this field, and I think about back to that year that I was born, a couple years before 1975, a time when public education was not available to children and youth with developmental disabilities in the United States. The doors even to our K-12 schools across the states, across our country weren't open. And our expectations were incredibly low, our vision incredibly small. That right didn't arrive till 2 years later in 1975, when what we now know as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act was first passed. That's my lifetime. That's some of yours as well. But it's interesting that it wasn't until I was approaching my own high school graduation that our field first made a clear commitment to ensuring young people with disabilities would have support to transition to adulthood. It wasn't until 1990 that the federally mandated transition services were passed, and we actually started giving serious attention to what happens to students when that we're serving when the school bus doesn't come anymore. That's 1990, which is 35 years ago. It wasn't until 20 years after that that we celebrated the reauthorization of the Higher Education Opportunities Act, which finally introduced provisions to establish a set of model demonstration programs around the country for inclusive higher education and began to provide access to financial aid for students with intellectual disability. That was, do the math, 16 years ago, right? I think it's incredible progress because now here we are talking at this gathering about the accomplishments of young people with intellectual disability in college programs and the ways in which our campuses are being transformed by their presence and participation and by their contributions and engagement. It's May, it's like graduation month. In my old state of Tennessee, at the 9 college programs that now exist there are maybe 100 or so students who are graduating from those programs. You see how different that is than in my lifespan when we wondered whether certain students could learn, and now we're graduating students from college. Incredible progress. Lots to go for sure. But there are more than 350 other colleges around the United States holding similar ceremonies for college students with intellectual disability. We have come a long way from a time when we debated whether students with intellectual disability would benefit from an education to now a time when we're seeing so many examples across the country of students with intellectual disability actually flourishing on their college campuses. So I just want to begin with that, like what a journey that has been. Even though I think I spend most of my time frustrated that we're not where we need to be, I think we need to celebrate the movements that we've made. So I want to focus my remarks with you all on what I see as 9 commitments that I think should mark our movements from here moving forward. As we think about expanding inclusive higher education for students with intellectual disability across your state of Texas, my own state of Texas, or California for you, Texas for me, as we think about those kinds of movements, what should mark our commitments? What should be our practices that we adopt and pursue? And I'm going to share this as someone who's watching this post-secondary educational movement, both from a distance. I'm a researcher and an advocate committed to this work, but also someone who saw it pretty close up for nearly a dozen years of being involved in the program at Vanderbilt Next Steps. So I think you're going to find these 9 proposals have implications for the opportunities we provide and the supports we offer, and maybe even the perspectives that we hold, maybe in campuses across your own state, wherever you happen to be. So the first of those 9 commitments, I think, is most important, that we have to be led by the aspirations of the young people with disabilities that we serve. And in all of our work, our starting assumption has to be that there is no separate set of dreams for young people with intellectual disability, for life after high school, for life in college, for life after graduation. And if you're like, well, what are those dreams and aspirations? Reverse the question. Like, what are the dreams and aspiration for any high school student about what they look forward to most about life after high school? And you can ask think back to your own time in high school. What did I look forward to most about life after graduation? We all had great excitement about the future. I bet we all had hopes for a good life, however we define that. And yeah, Megan, leaving our parents' house, like we had all these different kinds of dreams. The very same thing is true for young people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So my points are really simple. One, the presence of a disability label is not a reliable predictor of people's aspirations for their lives. If you spend times eavesdropping in the conversations that took place on Vanderbilt's campus or on UC Davis's campus or any campus that is welcoming students with intellectual disability, if you listen into conversations in the commons or in the quads or in the courtyards or the classes or the residence hall, if you listen in on person-centered planning meetings, what you hear people talk about in terms of their aspirations will sound utterly ordinary, not different, not a different set of dreams, but ordinary things. Young people with intellectual disability tell us they want a satisfying job. They tell us they want great friendships. They tell us they want a comfortable place to live and to hang out. They tell us they want involvement in their community. They tell us they want a chance to give something back. They tell us they want a place to belong. And more relevant to our conversation today, they're telling us they want a college degree. The presence of an intellectual disability doesn't predict or narrow what people want for their lives. And that may all sound like anecdote, right? I mean, that's great. But actually, the data bear this out. So often, we see that having a disability label predicts the opportunities people have, but not their aspirations. I mentioned this study in the morning talk, the National Longitudinal Transition Study. In this case, it was 2012, so it's about 12 years old now. They asked students about their expectations for life after high school. And 75% of high school students with autism said they expected to obtain a post-secondary education. Half of all students with intellectual disability expected the same, right? That's really interesting because then we kind of look forward. We've got so many young people who want that experience, but when we look at their actual experiences, we see that many students don't get that opportunity. About 8 years after leaving high school, only about 1 in 4 young adults with intellectual disability had started any type of program with a degree or certificate. Most never were given the opportunity to start or support. Most didn't finish. So there's this desire among more and more young people for college, and fortunately, opportunities are growing, but many people don't have that experience. We see the same thing in other areas as we look at aspirations of young people. It turns out in that same study, 95% of youth, high school students or youth who are autistic expect to have paid jobs in their early years after graduation. That's true for 94% of young people with intellectual disability. So what they don't say is they don't say they have dreams of underemployment or unemployment. They do not say they dream of piece rate wages and sheltered workplaces. And they don't tell us they have dreams for a lifetime of exclusion from the workforce, right? They have gifts to bring. They want to bring them. They want to work in the workplace. And yet the data tell us that that too happens so rarely for so many of our students. 18%, 17% depends on the year of adults with intellectual disability across the country are have paid jobs. The rest do not. And those who do, whether it's hours of work or pay or benefits, are often low, sometimes degree of integration or job satisfaction. So my point is there's a gap between those aspirations and those experiences. I think this is a call for us to continue to do more listening and responding to the young people in our communities so that the directions that we're pursuing on our campuses across our region do reflect their aspirations and not merely our expectations. And I think this is a really cool thing about looking back at history because it's almost like we've always been wrong about what young people with intellectual disability could accomplish or achieve. Their aspirations have almost always outpaced prevailing expectations. So here, as we think about this as kind of a marker, where would we go on our campuses if we were led by our students' aspirations? If we listened to them about what experiences they want in college, what would that lead us to move on our campuses as we move forward as well? Second is the importance of ensuring full access. If we take those aspirations seriously, I think it's going to eventually lead us to every corner of our college campuses. And yeah, I see, Becky, your note around sort of access to classroom, but what about the workplace or job in the field? How does this start to push us to think about pursuing full access to campus life for students? And what does full access look like for students with intellectual disability? Like, reverse the question. What does full access look like for any undergrad student? And think about your own college experience if you went to college. I think it means helping our students take interesting and challenging courses that align with their interests and their career goals. And maybe taking a few classes that expose them to things they never would have thought about or talked about, right? I think it means access to courses across the whole curriculum in a college and not just a narrow slice of courses, which we see in a lot of programs. I think it means helping our students become active members of a wide variety of clubs and student organizations that really pull upon their passions or expand their passions. I think it's being part of orientation events and campus programs and other experiences that expose them to new perspectives and possibilities. And I think it's about helping them access generically available campus supports that any other student might draw upon. Career centers, office of accommodations, advising, counseling, health, all those things become open on our campuses. And it's about being part of the internships and campus jobs that can inform their career trajectories. And it's also, of course, in all of that, it's the relational pieces to enjoy the social aspects of college life that lead to forging new and lifelong relationships. And I think for all those things to happen, it means experiencing life in the dorm lived with others if you're at a residential college experience. And this is a critical place to part because I think residential options are the key to so many learning and social and engagement opportunities that exist on campus. And I think about a third of all of the 350 programs are residential now. But if your college day ends at 4 p.m., and you think about all the classes and clubs and events and gatherings that now remain out of reach because they happen in the evenings or weekends, and all the informal opportunities to learn about life lived in community with others. So I think this is really important to make sure that access to campus life is all part of campus life. And I think that's important too, because so much of what college students learn about themselves and their world doesn't come from the textbook. Most lasting lessons don't. And this is not to minimize the coursework aspect of college programs, but just a challenge if you're working on a program to think about the entire campus as the classroom in a sense. And I think for some of you, again, I don't know if you're working on it in a program like this or working on a college campus, but I hope the call for full access will resonate. Um, Sometimes we are not bold enough to ask for this. We're just grateful to gain a place on campus, and then we'll try to get access to all of campus. Maybe we want to start small and then work our way out. I'm not sure about this, though. It's very hard to tinker and tweak your way to inclusion. That's been my lesson. It's not so much about the pace at which we move, it's about our end pursuits. And so I guess it's just the formative experiences of college are too hard to experience from the peripheries. So how do you create full access on campuses? What's the vision that we have for campuses as well? Yeah, and Megan, yeah, I love that. We'll talk. The dignity of risk will come up because as I'm navigating my own risk management people at campus, and we start talking about Greek life, the radars go up, right? But so we mean all of campus life, right? There's how do we mitigate risk and honor dignity of risk? Well, third, I think you're going to encounter at least a little hesitation on your campuses to this idea. I've noticed this here at a new campus. You get long pauses in people's responses when you talk about inclusion in every aspect of campus life. Maybe a little reluctance, a furrowed brow, or like a cocked head. I've gotten a few of those. Maybe some resistance or even pushback, right? From administration or maybe some faculty or staff. I think this is true of so many areas where we're making this push. We talked about it this morning. We get those pauses or reluctance or resistance in our workplaces and K-12 schools and congregations. I think so much of this comes back to, again, how the students we serve have come to be known for so long in their educational careers. Just to go back to the labels that I mentioned earlier, how so much of the way people are known in our communities are by all of those things that people can't do. And labels are really powerful things. And I'm afraid so often we choose the wrong ones in this work as we start to think about college and beyond. So many of the labels we use limit opportunities, highlight only challenges, emphasize only differences, and I think inadvertently stifle the dreams I was just talking about. And they have staying power. I'm mentioning it's not that there's no place for diagnostic labels, but they have staying power, and I think we're inclined to bring them into higher education, and I wonder whether they belong there as much. Because when I watch what happened on our campus at Vanderbilt through Next Steps, and I saw the things that our students were accomplishing, and the ways our 38 students were learning and contributing and all they were experiencing, and I see that on all these other campuses, I just didn't see the language of deficits and discrepancies as fitting or as appropriate here. I mean, to see our students, young people with deep passions and incredible strengths and gifts and drives and perspectives and enviable qualities where they're contributing in the workplace, where they're making important contributions in the classroom, kind of led me back to that, like, how do we change our introductions here? So we're avoiding, at least at the college level, inserting labels and diagnostic language that just doesn't seem to tell faculty or staff or peers what's most important to know about the young person they're about to meet, the young person who's about to take their class or be part of their residence hall. And so, I wonder what that looks like. This is maybe more posing a question about how do we change our introductions and talk entirely differently about the young adults we're serving and supporting. Kind of reminds me of a campaign that we did. We did this for years in Tennessee. I think they still do it every October during Disability Employment Awareness Month. It was called the Hire My Strengths campaign. And it was simply was a campaign to just feature people writing out their strengths and gifts and talents and passions on pieces of paper and taking pictures and asking our community, where in our community does someone need exactly those strengths? And I think that's kind of a bit of the posture that we might have as we think about this work in schools too. How do we come to introduce and connect people on the basis of strengths? Um, I don't know of any employer who hires you based on what you cannot do. Thomas, good point. I don't really know how many colleges admit you based on that as well. And so we have to know those things. So fourth of these kind of points. When I'm thinking about our own program's growth, and I was observing what was happening around the country, it struck me that the journey we're on is not a very linear one at all. Um, Many of us share common goals on our various campus, but the path that we take to realizing these goals isn't really as predictable as I think as we hope. It's much more winding than anticipated. It's way more individualized from campus to campus than it is standardized. And I think just the pathway from here to there, from where we are to where we want to be, is just not always obvious. There's really not a one size fits all for making these movements on a college campus. I suspect that's true at K-12 as well. But what we do need to know is we need to know if we're moving forward in ways that are actually going to lead us towards these goals we've been talking about. We have to have a way of knowing whether we're making progress, of moving in the right direction. And if you look at a national landscape, there are 350 plus programs around the country. Most of them have become self-contained or substantially separate. Maybe intentionally, but I think often by accident or from a lack of intentionality. And then there are other programs that are so deeply woven into the mission and fabric of that school. Programs that have run with residential, others that have been stuck or never started. So it's really important to be able to discern in all of this work whether you're moving in the right direction and in the right ways. So we need landmarks or points of reference that keep us focused, or guideposts might be the right, better word. If you've been part of this movement, you know about Think College, the technical assistance center for this movement in the United States. They've done incredible work around establishing standards, quality indicators for programs that want to ensure they do what they're doing aligns with recommended practices, like with the very best of what we know works. So I'd encourage you to learn about those best practices as you're thinking about reference points for your programs, or if you're a family member pursuing a program, to know how aligned it is with the now new accreditation standards. These kinds of guideposts help us figure out whether a program's strong or moving towards greater strength or in the opposite direction altogether. So a number of years ago, our program, when I was there at Vanderbilt, did that kind of thing of figuring out what are the markers of progress for us on our campus. So we began to kind of articulate our own set of reflection points that we wanted to gauge our growth on campus. Essentially, we wanted to develop a set of questions that we could ask ourselves whenever we were considering some particular area of expansion or thought about how we might move forward toward a particular issue. We wanted indicators that would move us towards excellence, towards inclusiveness, towards relevance, and towards sustainability. So we came up with 14 different indicators. And not surprisingly, each one of them you could just ask yourself, just like I said this morning, what are we doing well? What could we do better, more of or different? What do we do next? Great reflection questions. So I'm going to read through all 14 of these, and maybe these are points that you would think about on your campus. I actually wonder how much some of these might be relevant to K-12 experiences as well. But first, are we designing experiences and processes that align with those of any other undergrad student? In other words, as much as possible, our first inclination should be to approach things in ordinary rather than specialized ways. So this pushes us back to that question of, well, how would we do this for any other student on our campus? It's not the final question, but it might be the first question. And then second, are we exploring existing learning and social opportunities before we begin starting specialized ones? There's a real temptation to create something new or different for students with intellectual disability. We see it all the time: separate classes, separate campus supports, separate orientation events, separate residential options. So this guidepost is really pushing us to plumb the corners of our campus to make sure there isn't already some better, already existing place for a student to have an experience or a support or relationship before we start something new. Third, are we prioritizing experiences that involve students with and without disabilities in shared activities? And there may be context in where it makes most sense to design something specifically for students in that program. We do that for other majors. There may be times, but that should be the exception rather than the rule. It's the backup, not the default. And fourth, are we considering supports that would be available to any student and working to strengthen those supports as well? So I think sometimes there's this temptation to think the best support would come from program staff. After all, we hire people with expertise and experience, but I would challenge that temptation, I guess. How do we think about other more natural sources of support, again, for our students? And college students are incredible sources of support. Fifth, are we developing the capacity of the university and the broader community to support students in the program? And for the sake of time, I'm not going to comment on each of the rest of them, but just you can reach out. And actually, these indicators are all in your handouts. But do our practices reflect a student-focused approach that's individually tailored to meet needs? Do the experiences you provide have clear relevance for life after graduation and are addressed in ways that will last? Is the instruction and support we provide marked by high-quality research-based practices? Are we supporting students to have valued roles on campus and beyond? Do our efforts reflect high expectations for students and the campus? Are we involving traditionally enrolled undergrad and grad students in ways that enable them to grow personally and professionally? And are we taking steps to grow connections among alumni, families, employers, and others? Are the movements we're making done in ways that ensure they're sustainable over time? And are we creating the stories we will be proud and eager to tell, and then telling those stories well? So those are 14. You might be like, well, that's a lot, but we had like 50. So we're really proud to get it to 14. But actually, interestingly, I wonder how much these might be relevant to K-12 kind of things as well. So I'm not claiming we did all these well at Vanderbilt. We struggled with actually most of these, but it called us to do our work better, right? They became reference points. So what are your reflection points that keep you moving in that right direction? And that's really critical. Fifth, one of the arguments we often make around expanding higher education access is that it's a pathway for better outcomes for students with intellectual disabilities. And I think that certainly seems to be true. It turns out employment outcomes for students who graduate from these college programs are more than twice as high as national employment rates. And we also know enrollment in college tends to predict better employment outcomes. We know from some comments in the chat that doesn't always happen. But I'm convinced we have to be able to tell a strong story about the impact of this investment, especially because college is not cheap. It has to lead to more fruitful experiences. So we've been kind of studying this as well, of what do we know about what these experiences actually lead to. But I think there's a couple things that come to mind, at least as a field. We have to be able to show the added value of college experiences for students with intellectual disability. What I found is that many of the students and families who chose college already had employment in mind. Many already had work experiences. And so I don't think it necessarily changed their trajectories. It maybe deepened the quality of their work, but I think we have to show actually how it changes trajectories in some way. How do we show that the impact isn't just on employment rates, but we're actually changing the nature of those employment outcomes? That graduates are finding better jobs, more meaningful jobs, more aligned with their passions, more careers rather than jobs. I think the case can be made, but we need good data on it. These are just pictures of one of our students and her job experiences up to graduation. But I think we also have to be able to measure, to expand what we measure so we're capturing the differences it's making in the lives of students. So the main metric that we seem to be using to capture the impact of this movement is post-graduation employment rates and earnings. And I'm glad we're capturing that. That's really important. But I don't think that's the only or even the best impact of college on people's lives. So think about how this changes maybe students' vision for their own lives, their experiences of belonging in relationships, their self-determination and self-worth, their independence and confidence, their community connections, their exposure to new ideas, their pursuit of new pathways, or something else that's fundamentally different because you went to a college program for 4 years. And can we speak about in compelling ways about the impact of this movement? So it's funny how the things that matter most are the hardest to measure. So I think kind of like belonging, it's real, you know it when you feel it, but how do we actually measure it as well? So I would say also we have to actually think about impact at a much bigger level than even just our students with intellectual disability. Um, I think we almost always miss the full story when we talk about who benefits from inclusion. And this is especially true in our conversations about college. I'm absolutely certain that students with intellectual disability benefit greatly from the time they spend on their campus, from the courses they take, from the jobs they hold, from the relationships they form, from the mentorship they receive, from the experiences they have. The data are actually pretty clear. But that's actually just one part of the larger story. In my view, the more powerful portrait of inclusion is found in addressing how the entire community is strengthened by the presence and participation of young people with disabilities. How everyone in that college campus benefits from inclusion becoming more widespread. In other words, even talking about this morning, the proper unit of analysis for studying inclusion is not an individual student, but how the community as a whole is enriched. And we have examples of this that abound. There were faculty on Vanderbilt's campus who, like myself, as a faculty member, had students enrolled in their classes who talked about how their presence and participation enriched the conversations in the classes, how it pushed them to become better instructors. Vanderbilt, we had 150 or more faculty who had that opportunity. And some of them became the very best advocates for inviting their colleagues to get involved. So how do we talk about the impact on faculty or outside of the college of employers and others? And then there are college students who would point to their direct involvement with students with intellectual disability as the most formative part of their college experience. Most of college programs have peer mentors in some way. We had about 120 every year. They talked about what they gained from the relationships they formed, about how their initial ideas of who actually would have the most to gain from involvement got overturned as they saw this as much more reciprocal and more mutual. And then there are hundreds of other undergraduates and graduate students on any college campus. Like Vanderbilt had 8,000 undergraduates. And they're going on to become community leaders and civic leaders and congregation leaders and corporate leaders. And they're going to think differently about the communities they lead because they lived and learned alongside students with intellectual disability. And they're going to notice when important segments of their community are missing. And then there's all the employers who had the opportunity to hire our students who are benefiting from those students' work ethic, from their strengths, from their willingness and eagerness to learn, and from the ways that some of them really breathed life into the culture of that workplace. My point in all of this is that I think that in this movement, we're not working just for a better education for college students with intellectual disability. We're working for a better education for any undergrad. But we have to have data and to be able to tell the story of this impact well. And I would say that's true also as we think about our K-12 programs too. Okay, well, if this movement is really all that we say it is, that it brings lots of benefits to students and campuses alike, then it seems like we have a lot more work to do to expand opportunities here. How do we get more programs in our state or region to open up these opportunities? There are about 9,000 students, for example, in Tennessee, where I lived, with intellectual disability or autism between the ages of 18 to 26. But only about 200 of those 9,000 were part of any of the programs among the 15, well, now 22 programs in California, how many students are being served, and yet there's 1.1 million young adults with intellectual disability or autism between 18 and 26 across the state. So we're in 350 programs around the country, but 22 out of California, we've got a lot of work to do. 20 out of Texas, we have a lot of work to do, including here at Baylor as well. So college may not be the best pathway for every student, of course. So we have to have a range of meaningful options for life after high school, but it should be a pathway for more students than it is at present. If your state doesn't already have an alliance of post-secondary programs that are working together to expand opportunities, that might be a thing to learn about or to become part of. That kind of commitment to increasing access is going to lead us into have to spurring new programs as we actually try to build our own as well. So it's a lot of work. I think thinking about how you rally people in a community together to work collectively towards expanding opportunities is really, really critical. We've got to have more opportunities. I remember the first time that a prospective student to Vanderbilt's Next Step program turned down us to go to another college program because she had a better offer. In fact, she had multiple offers. And I had these like dueling emotions like, oh no, we didn't get picked. And then, oh my goodness, how incredible. That's a signpost of progress that we're making in this field. What a statement it is that more and more we're competing to enroll students who long ago didn't even have access to a free and appropriate public education. So I would love us to work together to expand that kind of frustration, like frustration that they're choosing someone else because there's so many options. So far, most of what I've shared is about strengthening movements into higher education. But some of you are actually working in elementary and secondary school. So I want you to just know the importance of the preparation that you're doing to educate and equip young people for life after high school in this area. Many of you know that this is the primary purpose of special education. It's to prepare students with disabilities for further education, employment, and independent living. This is a jargon-filled way of saying our charge is to help young people with intellectual disabilities to launch well into adulthood. That means that what you're doing with students when they're younger has a chance to change their trajectories. One of the most powerful forces in changing transition outcomes ends up being the expectations of teachers and parents and others. Because when we expect things like employment and college later on, it changes what we teach and where we teach it and how we teach it and with whom we teach it. And if we can expose students and families to new possibilities like college, it raises their expectations and aspirations. And more than any other predictor of post-school outcomes, the most powerful one is parent expectations. So those expectations are set in elementary school and early childhood and middle school. They're not set the year before college becomes an option. So think about how you might set those expectations early on for families so that they catch a glimpse of what's possible if their child's provided the right opportunities, supports, and encouragement. And then make sure families are connected to good resources to pursue these pathways. In Tennessee, we had a whole portal built out for learning about college opportunities for parents of children with intellectual disability. I don't know what your state might offer, but make sure you're connecting families with good information. So building bridges in matters, and eighth is building bridges out. Because we work so hard as we think about building these inclusive opportunities throughout K-12 schooling, and then parents are like, what's next? We actually now have a good answer about what's next. College may be a possibility. But now we're thinking about what about after college graduation? What comes next? And for so many years, the transition to adulthood, from high school to adulthood, was that proverbial bridge to nowhere. And we can't let that be true for life after college now, that we've just sort of deferred for 4 years and we're back in the same boat. And I do worry about that. There are so many cohorts that are graduating, another one of our graduation pictures, who are wondering what comes next. And I don't know that we do a good job of transitioning students from college into life after high school or life after college graduation. So what are the partnerships there we have to pursue that make sure those transitions are seamless and successful? What does transition planning out of college look like? How do we prime communities to receive graduates in their workplaces, in community groups and congregations? Becomes a really important question as well. Well, those are sort of these 9 sort of markers of kind of what I hope the future is looking like. And there's some incredible opportunities. But I feel like I've watched enough movements over the years to see there is often a shadow side if we aren't focused and fixed on our goals. The saying, there's only a few angles at which you can stay standing, a whole lot of angles in which you can fall down flat. And I think there's some risks that I see for this movement. I share these not as inevitabilities, but actually just as places to be cautious as you think about movements in California or elsewhere that you're trying to make. And I just have 3 of these, and then we'll shift into the kind of questions. But we have got to be careful that we do not create parallel programs that are largely specialized and essentially separate, or I would say more strongly are entirely segregated. Young people with intellectual disabilities more and more are telling us that they want to be at the center of their communities and not on the peripheries, not on the margins. And the very best educational opportunities, I think, already exist on our college campuses. So our charge in this movement is to create access, not to create new programs. We have to be careful about not creating college experiences that are functionally separate, that share a campus in common, but only intersect in very superficial ways. That's that veneer of inclusion that I was talking about earlier. And I think that does much more than shortchange students with intellectual disability. I think our campuses lose out when students' lives are not woven together. So those 8,000 undergrads and 7,000 grad students at Vanderbilt at the time I was there, they cannot lead corporations and communities and congregations if they live and learn in communities of which people with disabilities are not a part. So I think we just have to really think about not building things that down the road we're going to have to undo. Second thing that comes to mind is we have to be really careful not to import special education into higher education. I think we have learned a lot through what now more than nearly 5 decades of special education services. I see some danger in replicating these practices at the college level. And I just mean be careful. I don't don't uncritically adopt the assessment and planning and instructional and support models that we use in elementary and just pull them up to college. We have this incredible opportunity with college campuses that have a blank slate. And so we're not having to start in separate classrooms and work our way in. We could actually potentially start in a place of membership and belonging and full participation. But I just don't know that we get there when we're like, in fact, it's interesting. It feels like most of the staff, I'm sure someone's done a study on this, most of the staff hired for these programs end up being special educators. And then they do what special educators do. By the way, I was a special educator. I love what special educators do, but it should be different at college, right? Okay. Third, last of these, I think we have to lock in our focus so we are always remaining on people rather than programs. So I feel some reluctance when we talk about launching new college programs for students with intellectual disability. And it might sound like I'm just kind of harping on like this is just sort of a superficial thing. But really the goal is to support students to access existing programs and experiences on our campus. And that happens best when we think one person at a time. And so what happens you see on these college campuses as enrollment grows larger on the campuses, then we have this tendency to group people with similar labels together and to become more insulated in inward focus. So we hire our staff to support our students, to teach our courses, to host our events. And that leads colleges to replace our with your. Well, your students versus our students. And that inclination to think in terms of groups and programs, then it can unintentionally place limits on individualization. So person-centered, it's not like a word limited to once a year planning meetings. Like It's actually a posture. It's a posture we have as we think about campus movements. So I wrap up by, I guess, sharing my awe at how far we've come in, I think, a relatively short amount of time. I grew up professionally on the Vanderbilt campus. I did my graduate work there, my master's degree, and then my doctoral work, and then came back as a professor. And I watched the campus grow up as well. I came there 25 years, 30 years early. Oh my goodness, I'm getting old. 30 years earlier to become like I was aspiring transition teacher, and I entered their graduate program at Vanderbilt in 1996 to learn to be a transition teacher. And here's really important thing about that. There was no mention of inclusive college programs in any textbook on transition for students with intellectual disability. There was no reference to this possibility in any transition course at the time. We were still just trying to work so hard to get high school students into classes and clubs alongside their peers in high school or into workplaces alongside community members. And then to fast forward to the future where now, now I'm at Baylor, but I was teaching that same transition class that I took 25 years earlier. And not only was I talking about college programs for intellectual disabilities, I had students enrolled in my class who were experiencing those programs. And I think what a difference that makes now and how those future transition teachers are going to lead and teach their craft. So I hope, I don't know exactly all the things that are stirring in your communities and where you're thinking to go in this movement around college. But I'm just really excited about the future of higher education and hopeful that we will get it right. And that 20 years from now at the SIP conference, whatever anniversary conference, we're not talking about what we have to undo because we built it backwards or we built it broken when we had this opportunity to really kind of create a blank slate in many ways. So thanks for all your work and commitment to all those things. And love this picture of our of our graduates. I don't know what that's called, dabbing or whatever they're doing, but anyway, thank you for for your interest in this and your work in this area, and would love to hear your reactions and feedback to what I share.